And he's like, oh, you're going to make it different. And I was like, yes, don't worry, I have a plan.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming and thank you for your patience. My name is Denis Stolyarov. I'm an assistant curator here at Pushkin House. And I'm really grateful to our speakers tonight who managed to organize this event and bring such a wonderful crowd. And I'm going to introduce Caroline, and she'll do the rest. And Caroline Eden is a wonderful author of two books, Red Sands and Black Sea. Both of them are available downstairs. And she's a regular contributor to The Guardian, BBC, and Times Literary Supplement. And so thank you and welcome.
Can everybody hear me? Is this mic on? Welcome, and thank you all for joining us tonight. My name's Caroline Eden, as we know, and I felt extremely privileged to be here tonight, to be talking to two remarkable and much in demand women, both of whom need little introduction. The Ukrainian activist, cook and writer Olia Hercules, born in southern Ukraine, and Alissa Timoshkina, a cook and writer born in Omsk, southwest Siberia. Good friends, based here in London, who were just this morning on Woman's Hour together discussing Cook for Ukraine, which in aid of UNICEF has so far raised tens of thousands of pounds. To be precise, this morning, £211,000. We have chosen food as our topic and device this evening to lead us into a wider discussion. Why food, may you ask, at a time like this? Partly because we've all written about this topic within the region we're discussing tonight extensively. Olia, most recently in her book Summer Kitchens, and Alissa in her beautiful book Salt and Time, me in my book Black Sea, which begins in the port city of Odessa in southern Ukraine. And I think we show in our own ways how through food we can talk about everything and anything. From fermentation traditions to Gogol's greedy fictional characters to the richness of Ukraine's soil. There is a generosity, I believe, in writing about food. It can be wonderfully engaging, inviting, egalitarian and democratic. It is also important to have this discussion tonight because violence in wartime aims to destroy far more than people and buildings. Bombs and bullets also seek to decimate culture and shared memories, so much of which is wrapped up in food and the spirit of a place, in landscape, in soil, and in family life. And because food travels well, in dissolving barriers and ignoring borders. There'll be 15 minutes for questions at the end. I have a lot to get through. Please think about any questions you'd like. I'm going to go on for about 45 minutes and then we'll have the questions. So let us begin. This has been a difficult one for me to prepare questions for, as I'm sure you can imagine I've done my best. And I'd like to begin this evening. We are all collectively hanging on by our fingertips, I feel. Shocked afresh each day at the horrors this war is bringing. And I'd like to start by asking Olia, how are your parents? How is your brother?
Incredibly strong and stoic and brave. I don't know how many adjectives I can find to describe the same thing. You know, the only time that I've seen my mom cry since the beginning of it all was when we actually lost touch for 24/7. So they have been trying to cut communications in the south of Ukraine, in the Kherson region, to cut us away, you know, to cut them away from the world. And when we lost touch for that 24 hours and I didn't know where they were or whatever, you know, and my mom finally found a way and she phoned me, and that's when she was crying because she was worried that I was worried about her. That's my mom, you know. And I was like, Mom, I've already arranged, like, so later on in the day, if this like strange guy comes on the bike, he's there to check on you, you know. So that's my parents under siege in the south of Ukraine. My brother is in Kyiv, and I just remembered something the other day, which is, you know that it's very common kind of a stereotypical expression, like he wouldn't kill a fly. Literally, one day we were in my parents' house and it was summer and there were loads of fruit flies and I swatted one. And he turned around to me and was like, "What did it do to you? Like, why did you kill the fruit fly?" You know, he's that kind of man. And now and he was just a few weeks ago was setting up his eco bike delivery service around Kyiv. So, and now he's, on the third day of the war, he joined the territorial defense. So he's there and he's been training, crawling around on the floor and doing all of these things that, are completely unimaginable to any of us. But every single morning, because my morning starts with little messages like, Yakve, 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 how are you, how are you, how are you, how are you? Like first my parents, then my brother, then all of my extended family, then my friends. And my brother has been so amazing. He replies, like my parents can be, I think they're feeling a little bit low recently, so they'll just be like, "We're okay, don't worry." But my brother every morning has set out to do like a little video message me. And he's smiling and he's got a little jar of Jacobs, which has become his mug. And he has this little Jacobs coffee every morning, and he's, and he's upbeat, and he's just incredible. And then there's also his children that were with him in Kyiv, but then left for Lviv. So I've got two nephews who are in their early 20s. My brother is 46, by the way, but he's already got children who are in their early 20s. And also my niece who is 14. And they've been spending the last few nights in Lviv in the bomb shelter, as long as 5 hours sometimes. But again, they're just so cool as a cucumber. They're just like, "Auntie Olia, we're fine. We're like helping out. We're not sitting around crying." The other day I spoke to my nephew Nikita and he was like, "Oh, I just heard a siren, but I'm working, so I have to I'm not gonna go into the shelter, I'm just gonna go." I'm like, "No, get into the shelter now." So it's that kind of thing. So they are just, I really don't know how to describe them and the rest of Ukrainian people, to be honest with you. I think everybody is just, heroic has, for me, finally kind of made sense in a way. So yeah, so that's them.
We've all seen wonderful videos of your brother on your Instagram feed, and I think we're all inspired by him.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
He looks like a great guy. I hope to maybe meet him one day.
Me too, I hope he comes.
I was going to ask you, Ollie, but you've kind of answered the question slightly about how your life has changed. Like, what do you do when you get up in the mornings now? Your life has changed so much just recently. You're checking in with your family, and you're probably up through the night checking the news. I mean, how are you coping?
I was for a while. The first few nights I don't think I slept even for an hour, but afterwards you just realize, and having all of the strength that they're kind of projecting through whatever little video calls that we have or whatever, it just kind of makes you pause and think, if they're doing what they're doing, then I really have to just, I have to find ways to regulate my nervous system, to regulate my brain, to draw strength from wherever I can, to put the phone maybe in the drawer at 7 o'clock in the evening and not touch it. And I try my best. I've still, the night before last, I was there on Twitter until 1, just scrolling and looking for little glimpses of what's in the future. Is there a glimpse of hope, that kind of thing.
You will miss one thing that one
exactly.
analyst or one journalist that will say that will give us hope that something is around the corner, maybe.
And also, am I going to miss tweeting something really important that might save someone's life or might makes someone feel better? It's that kind of really intense pressure that I feel as well. But I'm learning how to cope because I have my family, and I have my family in Ukraine, and I have my family here as well. I have 2 children, so I have to. Otherwise, I'll fall apart, and then that's not gonna be good for anyone. So,
thank you. I want to talk a little bit about people leaving. So many of us have been sickened by the endless questioning and barriers that have been put up against refugees trying to leave, who belongs where, the footage of pictures, people queuing in desperation, trying to get visas, papers, and failing is heartbreaking for us to see, for most of us decent people to see this. Olia, are your friends and extended family safe, and have any of them left?
No one is budging.
No one's budging.
No one's budging. I'm try to insist. I mean, I don't think my parents can leave. It's extremely dangerous right now. But and my friends are just like, the other day I said, like, that there's this like refugee scheme now, and somebody, like a friend of a friend, said that they have this really beautiful house in Islington, and maybe you can come and stay there for a while. It's going to be like, you have a kid, like, come on. And they're just like, I'll ask around, but not me. I'm just staying. And it's just doesn't work that way. But I am working on, I've started the application for my niece, because she's 14 and she's in Lviv, and ever since they started bombing, and she had a really terrible time during the pandemic as well, with no school and whatever, and I'm just like, I need to get her out of there.
Yeah.
So that's the only kind of like person that I know in Ukraine who...
That's the only one. I find that amazing in a way, but yeah.
Yeah, me too, like, yeah. But yeah.
Alissa, sorry. I want to talk to you about a similar scenario that's happening in Russia, obviously. So the ruble has collapsed, and quite a large number of young Russians are fleeing. And they've headed for cities like Yerevan, Tbilisi, Istanbul. In Russia, the Western accountancy firms have left, KPMG, PwC, car companies, shutting factories. Huge job losses, huge crisis for the middle class. Instagram has gone, all of these things happening. The mass exodus is one of the biggest movements of people from Russia in modern times, and it's already having a huge impact. My husband and I have noticed rent increases happening in Almaty, even in Kazakhstan. I handed over my Airbnb keys, I was in Bishkek recently, to two friends who were leaving Moscow. They arrived with 2 duffel bags, and they said, we don't know what we're doing, where we're going to go home. Aeroflot had seats to Bishkek, so that's why we came here, and I just said, good luck. We had lunch, and I left the next day. How are your friends and family feeling coping back in Russia? And do you know people who've fled, and where have they gone? And can you tell us something about them?
Yes, absolutely. Well, in a way, luckily, my parents have left Russia after the Crimean War, and I'm very proud of myself for convincing them to leave, because I dare not imagine what it would have been like experiencing this right now, when it's a lot more difficult, if not completely impossible. And my grandmother is still there. Sadly, she's kind of cut off from the extended family who are pro-Putin, and she wonderfully is not.
And she's in Omsk?
She's in Omsk, yeah. So it's very heartbreaking for her. And for my parents as well, they still have kind of financial ties to Russia. So the last, 2.5 weeks were absolutely horrendous. It's impossible to get money out of Russia. Yeah. And, from a personal perspective, it's just really heartbreaking to see just the crumbling apart of the culture and the society that's been built over decades, and it's literally within the 2 weeks, it's just fallen apart at an unbelievable speed. Yeah. And I have some friends who are struggling to get their parents out, so there's a lot of stress, very close friends, and there's a lot of stress about that. Luckily, they have the means, financial means, and also immigration means to leave and stay somewhere safely, but there's so many people who are trapped,
Like you said on Woman's Hour this morning, I listened on the train down from Edinburgh, you were saying, obviously, if someone goes to Istanbul from Russia, I get a visa for 3 months, but I don't think Russians necessarily get such a long visa, so then what? There's such uncertainty.
Exactly, and a very good friend of mine, I actually did an Instagram live with her today, so it's still on my feed, and I highly recommend listening to that conversation. She's this beautiful, wonderful woman who's a food historian and a writer, and she writes beautifully about family and kind of Jewish Russian cuisine. And she's a huge protester, so she's been to protests, and she has a small son So she had no choice, she had to leave because she's been very vocal and, you know, even though she's not kind of a prominent, you know, she's not Navalny level of prominence, but, you know, they gradually start hunting people down with face recognition, with phone tracking. You know, it's a proper police state right now. And it was absolutely devastating to hear her tell the story of how they just finished renovating an apartment. And of course, you know, in the context of what's happening to the most beautiful buildings in Ukraine, you know, a renovated apartment is not the most atrocious thing that, you know, you can leave behind. But still, you know, she left everything. She just packed her bags, just one bag, grabbed her son, who still doesn't understand why he can't have a play date with his friends. And they're kind of in limbo in Istanbul right now. But, you know, at the same time, she said the amazing community that's already forming there. And it's very reminiscent of, you know, the kind of 1917 and the...
I keep thinking of Tefi.
Yes,
Tefi's
exactly,
stories.
yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And, you know, the emigres that left Russia and the Soviet Union, and these new communities forming, you know,
but rather than coming into the docks in Galata, they're coming in on aeroplanes, and Istanbul is another safe haven. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. And Alissa, we've all heard about Starbucks and McDonald's pulling out. I mean, the rate of companies, Western companies leaving Russia is really, really fast and really incredible, really. I want to move this slightly onto food. What else can you tell us? Like, are we going to start seeing an effect on food supplies in Russia, like with Western companies leaving? I mean, can you talk about that a little bit?
Of course. And I mean, you know, from a culinary perspective, the loss of McDonald's is not the greatest loss. But let's put it in context of what it means, the symbolism of McDonald's in Russian post-Soviet culture. Right. It literally was the first sign of freedom and of the collapse of this horrendous regime. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure you've all seen, you know, those iconic images of queues around, you know, the block that queuing up for McDonald's. And it's just that symbol of freedom of choice, freedom of speech. And that's all gone now. And, you know, there are lots of Russians who are trying to, I mean, keep a brave face is not really the right word, but, you know, they're being kind of stubbornly proud of being Russian and sticking to it. And some people say, well, we've got our own, you know, meatballs, and, you know, kind of forgetting that the meat patty actually came from Mikoyan's trip to the United States in the 30s, so that's not Russian either. But they kind of very proudly hang on to their kotlety, which are not Russian by any means. And they say, we'll be fine. But of course, that's just, you know, farce, and it's kind of keeping a poker face for no reason, really.
Alissa, you know what really broke my heart when you were talking about the next cookbook that you were starting to write? And
you said that you had this trip around Russia planned where you were going to go see in these beautiful independent producers, and now what's going to happen to them? That really is just, for me, is just, yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a traumatic experience for me. You know, I've kind of almost, you know, made friends with them over, you know, months of research, being in touch on Instagram and, you know, voice messaging each other and planning our book shoot and, you know, talking about recipes. And it really felt, you know, I'll admit I have a kind of a complex relationship to my own country, precisely because of the political history and Putin's regime. But by working on my first cookbook and starting to do my second cookbook and talking to people, you know, I really felt kind of rejuvenated, and I felt this new interest and new passion for my country, and meeting so many fantastic people from, you know, the Far East, you know, Vladivostok, and where they mix kind of interestingly, you know, taiga food with Asian food and seafood, to like northern cuisine in St. Petersburg. And, you know, I don't even want to think that, like, that's gone now. I mean, the sanctions, of course, are killing all small businesses. That's, you know, and all the ban of social media that so many people use, not just for, you know, exchanging political messages, but for work as well. It's a fantastic medium for promoting small businesses. That's all gone. And I mean, yeah, the food shortage, they'll affect everyone. I mean, grechka, which is like, you know, buckwheat groats, which are like the staple of kind of Eastern European cuisine that's been there through the wars. And, you know, the price of grechka now is like astronomical. And yeah, that's already a sign that, you know, this, yeah, Russia is heading into a very dark time.
At the same time as all of this horror, we can't lose sight of the deeply entangled shared cultures between Russia and Ukraine. Can you both talk to us about your family backgrounds? I think you, Alissa, have Jewish-Ukrainian roots on your mother's side, and you, Olia, say the history of your family is both Ukrainian and Russian. Maybe you can go first, Olia. Tell us a little bit about the background.
Yeah, so mostly Ukrainian, probably a little bit of Jewish somewhere. I have a great-grandfather who is called Moises, but we don't know much, further than that. There's this, a little bit of mystery there. And then my paternal grandmother, Vera Pasikova, was from Siberia, actually. And, but, there's never been, I don't know, we always felt united by the horror that was the Soviet Union, in a way. So my grandma was born in Tyumen, in a tiny village, and when the Bolsheviks got there, her father was a cobbler, which means that he was a businessman. So they just shot him. They took him away. They shot him. They took their house. They took their cow. And my grandma, one of four, and her mom were basically just left homeless. And, and it was the most excruciating, most horrible thing that I felt that I did when I asked my grandma to tell me the story, and I recorded it. I thought that it was important, but I've never seen her cry like this before. And she told me in detail about how it was. And, things like her mom eventually found a job at a condensed milk making factory, and she had to scrape the machinery at the end of the day to feed her children. That kind of thing. So that's what the Bolsheviks and the USSR did to my Russian grandma. We say Russian, she was probably part native Siberian, but she didn't even kind of got to explore that side of her either, So, so that's the Russian side. And then in the 50s, she left Siberia. She was married and she had a daughter, and her husband killed someone in a drunken brawl and was imprisoned, and she divorced him and thought, well, actually, it's the 1950s in Siberia, and it was extremely hard to be there. There was no food. It was a tough place to be. So she took her daughter and went on a train to Uzbekistan, actually, to Central Asia, because it was Tashkent was called the city of bread, and they said that there's plenty of food and jobs and friendly people around that will welcome her. And she believed in it, and she went, and it was true. And on the way there, she met my Ukrainian grandfather on the train. And he fell in love with her, apparently, and 9 months later he sent her a letter and came and found her in Tashkent, and my dad was born another 9 months later. So my dad was born in Tashkent in Uzbekistan, where they lived. My grandma lived there for 10 years, and then eventually they moved to Ukraine. So yeah, and on my mother's side, everyone is pretty much from the Odessa kind of Bessarabian area, actually, and some great-grandmothers were Moldovan, and I know that there's been Yiddish, Moldovan, and Ukrainian spoken, and obviously Russian spoken in my family, in my mom's family, and she's one of 6. So it's pretty mixed in a way. But and actually I grew up speaking Russian better than Ukrainian, because south of Ukraine, the closer you are to the center, to Moscow, the more of that kind of suppression of culture and language that has been throughout the years. And actually, when I moved to Cyprus when I was 12, I got into an English school, and I remember clearly, I'll never forget this moment for some reason, but there was a questionnaire that I had to fill out, and they said, your first language. And I paused, and I was like, oh, I really want to put Ukrainian, but actually my Russian is better than my Ukrainian. What do I put? And then I put Russian, and then I went to my mom, and I went Mom, why do I speak better Russian than Ukrainian? It doesn't make sense to me, And she kind of tried to explain. And, when they were kids, she grew up in the Mykolaiv region, and she said that when we were kids at school, and by the way, my parents met when they were 6 in the first form of school. They've known each other their whole lives. It's really cute. My dad pursued my mom and whatever. They've been together ever since. But when they were little at school, if they did speak Ukrainian, they'd be teased and bullied and called Seluk, which means peasant or villager. So, and then when they were a little bit older and were trying to find jobs, if you spoke Ukrainian, you wouldn't get the good job. You were at the bottom of the pile. You were nothing. So that's been the systematic Russian kind of chauvinism that's been happening. And that's why I think people are, some Ukrainian people now are like, Russia, and then they're kind of like projecting it on everything else. And I'm just trying to communicate that please don't. Like that was the USSR, just like it is now Putin. It's, we have to kind of like keep it in our minds that it's not the word Russian or the culture or, it's something deeper than that. It's more like the way that like Putin's brain works is like this old patriarchal, turgid, like rotten, evil thing against creative, free, lovely, feminine beginning. I don't know. That's just something that's like floating around in my head.
Alissa, can you tell us a little bit about your background, your family background?
Yes, so on my mom's side, it's actually interesting, the more, of course, in recent months, we've been talking a lot about family and roots, and the more we talk about it, the more I realize that I'm actually more Ukrainian than Russian. So on my mom's side, we have Ukrainian Jews, but also Ukrainians and Poles, and there's only a small fracture that's actually ethnically Russian. And then on my dad's side, both of his parents were orphans, so we don't actually know much about his origins, but we know they are from Belarus, and some of my dad's cousins are in Ukraine. So again, Eastern Europe, but not Russia.
Yeah.
And it's, my family, especially my Jewish Ukrainian family, it just happened so that I was raised by my great-grandmother, who was this incredible woman called Rosalia. She had the most incredible life. She was born in 1912. And she was born in Luhansk, or Simferopol, no, I can't. Simferopol, sorry, Mom is there. Yeah. And, she was there when the revolution had happened, and they were quite a wealthy Jewish family. We have a postcard of saying, that was the family bank was there, and they had this beautiful house that was then turned into some kind of municipal building. And my mom was saying that, the granny would take her later there, where there were like people queuing to fill out some forms, and she would say, "Oh, this used to be my bedroom. This used to be our dining room." So everything was taken from them. Luckily, no one was killed, in the way that Olia's family suffered. But they also lost everything. And then she lived through the Holocaust. The Holocaust by bullet in Ukraine. Her sister sadly did not survive that, and she moved to Siberia, was evacuated to Siberia during the Second World War because her husband was an engineer and was part of the war effort manufacturing weapons and stuff. And then when my mom was born, they moved back and forth between Ukraine and Russia. So my mom, has lots of fantastic memories about summers in Ukraine and beautiful family picnics by the river and, a beautiful country house that they had. So, even though I've never been to Ukraine, but because I was so close to my Jewish Ukrainian great-grandmother and then my grandfather, her son, as a kid, I spoke with a Ukrainian accent, because my great-granny, she was kind of the main caregiver, and she retained her very strong Ukrainian accent all her life, and so did my grandfather. So now, actually, when I met Olia's dad the first time, the way he speaks was so similar to the way my grandfather spoke. And I just felt this, partly of course because he's the father of my dear friend, but because he sounded like my grandfather, I just felt this and my grandfather sadly passed away quite young. I felt this overwhelming warmth for him. I just wanted to cuddle him because he just reminded me so much of my own grandfather.
He's very cuddly.
And he's lovely, yeah. And so, to me, even though I don't have a kind of embodied experience of being in Ukraine, to me, precisely because of my family and the way I was brought up, it holds such a special place in my heart and the Ukrainian accent, because our family kind of speaks in a mixture of, some words we say in Ukrainian, some words we say in Russian. And I never actually clicked that it's Ukrainian words. I just thought that's kind of how we spoke in the family. But again, meeting people from Ukraine, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's actually not Russian. So yeah, and weirdly, this whole experience is really making me kind of reevaluate my own identity and a place of belonging. And, you know, I'm still would identify as Russian, but, you know, I feel a lot of closeness and warmth for Ukraine, for sure.
This leads me well into the next question. In your cookbooks, this mosaic of different cultures is represented. There's Russian, Ukrainian stories, recipes, also Georgian, Polish, Uzbek, Armenian, Moldovan, and so on. As you once said, Olia, even though the Soviet Union suppressed the individuality of the countries within it, somehow the dishes survived all that. Do you both think that even in times like this, that food can offer a route into understanding between different cultures, and how? Please can you share some ideas and tales of food of sitting around the table that highlights this? And what are the dishes that really unite Russia and Ukraine on a table? Maybe you can start, Olia.
Yeah, sure. So the first question was the way that we can use food to...
Yeah, do you really believe this concept of sort of coming together through the different cuisines?
I do, yeah. It doesn't matter what cuisine it is, the very act of sitting together around the table is an extremely powerful thing. So when I was growing up, as I said, my mom is one of 6, so we have a really huge extended family with cousins, you know, coming from all over the place, and we'd all gather in the village of Lyubimovka, which is just, 10 kilometers away from where my parents are now, where my grandma lived. And every summer, winter as well, but I remember the summers, of course, that we'd sit, there'd be a big table laid out outside under the walnut tree, and loads of food would be made, and it'd be kind of like, room temperature, like in Georgia, because come on, like, I never understood the warm plate thing. Anyway, because it's like a long thing, it's a long evening, and everybody's talking and drinking and eating and cooking together, and when I was a kid, it was just such an interesting, weird thing. When we were very little, we really didn't get it, because at some point people was, our family would start talking and reciting stories, and then all of a sudden, they'd be laughing a lot, and then all of a sudden somebody would tell a story and they'd just be all like crying. Everybody would just be like so incredibly powerfully emotional, and the kids would be like, okay, just run away. And then you'd get older and older, and then we started tuning in. And this is, I think, where my love of storytelling comes from. And some of the stories, and we'd know which one is coming next as well, because the same powerful stories would be reiterated year after year. And then the crying made sense as well, slowly. And then at some point, I just really, how could they retain their kindness? How could they retain their positivity after being through so much of that? And actually, these sessions around the table were the answer. We don't have a culture of therapy in Ukraine, but this was it. This is like group family therapy. That's what it was. Food, a glass of moonshine or homemade like berry wine or something like that. Beautiful sunshine, a walnut tree, all of your loved ones gathered together, kids running around and being free and happy, and that's how you get through things, really, I think.
And tell us what was on the table.
Just
a couple of dishes.
Sure.
What delicious things were you sharing?
I mean, always be some kind of a broth. Definitely a borscht. Oh my God, if my mom, whenever my mom comes to England, she needs to have a soup every single day. Like, she can't imagine not having something liquid as a food. It's just a thing. So that, if it was kind of like June, there'd be green borscht with sorrel and beautiful spring onions and little bits of chopped egg on top. There'd always be pirishki or piroshki in Russian, which are these fluffy kefir dough buns that my auntie would fry in quite a lot of oil. So there'd be like savory donuts, quite often with either potato or spring onion and egg or something like that, loads of dill, of course, or like also the sweet versions. In winter, it would be actually quite non-stereotypical Ukrainian dishes like nudli, which are these really beautiful Bessarabian dumplings cooked on top of a pork or duck stew, and duck noodles, which is, lokshanaz huskoyo, or it wasn't even duck, it was probably goose. So my uncle was a surgeon. He was a traumatologist, and he was a very, very good one. And, you know, during the Soviet years, especially, if, you know, people would want to thank you, and instead of giving you money, you know, they'd bring you a goose, because you were like in a village. So there's also always plenty of geese in our house. So my auntie Zhenya, his wife, started doing, my auntie started doing this dish where she would cook the goose in its own juices, and then she'd make this really beautiful egg noodle dough, and she'd make it in the morning, she'd let it rest, but then it was my uncle's job to roll it out and to cut it by hand into these, like, because he was a surgeon, into these like perfectly cut little square noodles, and then the goose would be cooked and the noodles would be stirred through the goose fat and all of the delicious things, and it's
So
just
he
like...
never had a rest.
No.
Really didn't.
Olia, do you remember the first time I went to Odessa, 2016 or something?
You were like, what shall I look out for?
You
And I
said
said,
this.
well,
No, better than that. You said three things.
Okay.
Forshmak,
sure.
Gobiz, Rapani. And I got them all on the first night at the Hotel Cochrane. Were those things...
You were like, "Rapana."
It's an incredible, it was an incredible experience. I went head first into the Black Sea. Were those things ever on the table, or were these the sort of more exotic things you wanted to test?
No, not at all. So,
Forshmak, right?
Forshmak maybe not on the top of our list. Sorry about that.
I quite like it.
I know, it's good.
That was my Jewish granny's.
Right? Yeah. But the whelks, so rapane are these like monstrous, huge whelks from Odessa. And we had those because actually I have loads of, one of my mom's brother moved to Odessa, so I have like a whole bunch of people living in Odessa. So if they came to my grandma's, they'd bring, yeah.
They're the most delicious things. So I got them.
Got them, the big shell, and chopped up inside. It's just like mushrooms. Because they were cooked in like cream and herbs and stuff, and then...
Yeah, they were like the mollusk of the mollusk fungus.
Incredible. And all I could see, I remember...
reflection in the
hotel glass, and I was eating these things, and I was just like, this is so intense. Odessa is the most melancholy, wonderful city in the world. It's just, anyway, thank you. And Alissa, maybe you can talk a little bit about your shared things on the table which unite the Russian and Ukrainian cuisine, maybe in the winter time.
Yes, I mean, borscht is key. And yeah, the more I talk about food to people and kind of what dish really symbolizes home for you, so many people say borscht. And, one of the first things that I asked my mom to cook when she got here was borscht, of course. And I love it that my daughter loves it too, even though, she's born and bred in London. She loves it as well. So, yeah, to me, that's one of the key dishes that really kind of defines me as a human being. But also, my Jewish great-grandmother, she was a great baker, so she made lots of kind of yeasted sweet dough. So, poppy seed buns, that's kind of that scent of the kind of vanilla dough, and maybe slightly burnt. As she got older, her cooking skills, of course, were not top-notch, and that smell of slightly kind of overcooked, burnt dough is something that really reminds me of her a lot. And of course, it's kind of, classic Jewish thing like rugula. And then anything with fermented stuff, so fermented cabbage soup. The same goose is a huge thing for winter, and we would cook it with stewed sauerkraut and then kind of stuff the goose with that, and then you get this like super fatty but very tangy and sharp kraut, which is incredible. And then in the summer, because Omsk is so close to Kazakhstan, so there's a lot of influence from Central Asia, so plov is a huge thing. There's so many amazing, very kind of low-key cafes run by people from Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. They're almost like, in Omsk, there's some cafes which use old train compartments. They're like wonderfully surreal. Yeah. And my parents have celebrated their like wedding anniversaries there. And they make like the best plov. And I remember my uncle as well, he had a dacha where they would have like this massive kazan, which is a traditional cast iron dish for cooking plov, and it would be cooked on an open fire, and everyone would be chucking down vodka shots and kind of mixing this massive plov. And lots of eating outside as well, because of course, in Siberia, we're not spoiled by climate the same way as you are. in your lovely part of the world. So, you know, as soon as it gets warm enough to be outside, everyone goes outside. And if you don't have a dacha or a countryside house of any kind, you just go drive out to the woods. There are no regulations about open fires in the woods, unfortunately.
Same in Ukraine, pine forests.
Yeah. So people would just go out and bring food with them, and then you would do shashliks, and, you know, you do kind of a barbecue outside, and then you would forage for mushrooms. So there are so many beautiful memories, and, you know, Siberia is a really beautiful and very fertile place for berries and herbs and mushrooms. So I feel very lucky to have grown up there as well, even though, you know, the climate for most part was not particularly friendly, but at the same time, there was so much joy when the warm months arrived.
Absolutely. Oh, it's the best food in the world you're describing. I wondered something, Alissa, on the train down about Ukrainian restaurants or cafes in Russia. I've always been distracted by the Georgian restaurants and cafes when I've been in Russia, but is there a tradition of Ukrainian cafes or restaurants?
Well, actually, funnily enough, I'd completely forgotten that episode from my family history, but my uncle, my mum's brother, he's a very kind of adventurous businessman and comes up with new business ventures every like 5 years. So
we've all got one in the family. There's always one.
Yeah. So at one point, he became a restaurateur, and he bought, there's this really one beautiful old street in Omsk, where they're kind of ancient kind of basements that were not used for anything. So he just bought a whole bunch of them and opened like 5 restaurants, I think.
Wow.
And one of them was an Uzbek restaurant, another one was Italian, and then like kind of
Tick.
and then a Ukrainian one. So he ran a Ukrainian restaurant.
He did. Oh, good.
Yeah. Other than that, I can't think of any other ones, to be honest.
Right. Okay. That's a great example. Then I love that. Olia, you write so beautifully in Mamushka about the summers in southern Ukraine, fresh sour cherries, geese pecking at our mulberry-stained feet. You associate this word Mamushka with strong women in general. One woman, other than yourself, who has personified this recently, surely is the heroic lady in Kiev who launched the 3-litre jar of fermented tomatoes at the Russian drone, which many of us have heard about. She's become something of a symbol of the Ukrainian refusal to be cowed, of standing up to Russia's vast military apparatus, of the unbreakable Ukrainian spirit. Olia, can you expand on that story a little bit, please? Because we all want to know more. And talk a little bit more about the courageous women in Ukraine who are fighting back at the moment in such ingenious ways.
Sure. So I really, really hope that it's not just an urban legend. But to be honest with you, when I heard it, I was like, yeah, I get it.
I thought that too.
And, you know, in the beginning, it was like a woman with a cucumber jar, like, you know, destroyed a drone. And then they found the woman, and actually she corrected everyone and was like, it wasn't cucumbers, it was tomatoes. Which makes much more sense because they're extremely explosive, you know. Yes, my mom calls them champagne tomatoes because they pop in your mouth. Yeah, in terms of female kind of strength and power, I'm not surprised that so many women are at the forefront. I feel like I grew up in a matriarchal household. Like, to me, like, I maybe learned about feminism at university when I went to University of Work. I remember actually writing an email to my professor, who was a woman, Loredana Pelezzi, I will never forget, and I said, Mrs. Pelezzi, and she just like wrote me an email going like, Mrs. blah, 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 like explained feminism to me in like a really like intense way. And then once I started learning about it, I was like, wait, hold on, okay, maybe I didn't know the concept, but actually within myself, I knew very much what that was because my grandmother, my mom's mom, was a matriarch. Like, she was kind, she was amazing, but she held everything on her shoulders. Like, my grandfather Victor came back from the war, and then afterwards, after the Stalin's kind of like repression and imprisonment as well. And I remember him as extremely kind, but he was always like sitting on his stool, kind of a little bit in the corner, with his little like roll up and a little bit of wine if he could sneak it in, if like my grandma would allow it. And you know, just cracking like very poignant little jokes. So he was incredible. He was an incredible man. But like the power, the kind of the energy of the house was my grandmother, Alissa.
she was just like straight back until she died. I remember actually washing her back once. Like we went, she was already living, my granddad was dead, and she was living in a separate flat, and me and my mom would come and see her, and once she asked me to clean her back when she was sitting in the bath, and I will never forget that, and I wish that I did that many more times than I did at that point. I was only 12, so I didn't understand. But I was washing her back, and afterwards I told my mom, like, how does she have such a powerful, beautiful, smooth-skinned back? How is that even possible? Like, with the life that she had, 6 children, a small holding, taking care of her husband who's like suffering for sure of like extreme PTSD his whole life, you know, like how can one woman do it? So I'm not surprised about the jar story, and I'm not surprised about all of the women that are now, you know, doing everything, every single thing that they can, whether they're actually there physically or behind and doing other things to help, you know. It's yeah, Ukrainian women, but actually equally my Siberian grandma was a toughie as well. Oh my God. I mean, she was, you know, the Ukrainian granddad story didn't work out. He was not the easiest of men, and they actually divorced when my dad was 9. So she was a single mom, like I was for a while as well. So my Russian grandma was a single mom, and she brought up the most incredible man, that's my dad. And she's always been both kind and strong, and that for me has always been like the bar, you know, like you have to be powerful, but you also have to keep your humanity and be extremely kind. And that's like, yeah, that's been my life.
Thank you.
That memory of washing the back is actually
Very
moving.
about that, yeah.
Thank you. Alissa, with Cook for Ukraine, I was wondering, perhaps a bit naively, with the propaganda and pressure being as toxic as it is for those who are anti-war in Russia, but do you know of any Russians who are getting behind the campaign, maybe not in Russia or maybe, but outside through the digital world now obviously closed in Russia, and has it had a good response with any Russians that you know? Like, what's the response been in that sense? And
well, naively, I was also hoping to create this campaign to involve Russians and so many food friends of mine in Russia who I know would have loved to get involved.
Yep.
But sadly, within days of the invasion, the Russian government issued a law that it is now considered treason to support Ukraine, and you get up to 20 years in prison for it. And I mean, just the word treason itself is so archaic and kind of Stalinist era. So, you know, I just feel wrong even approaching people because I'm asking them to literally risk their lives. It's not about donating your time or giving a bit of money. It's literally putting your life on the line. So sadly not, but I'm hoping to reach out to some friends of mine who have left now and who would hopefully feel safer to do it. Again, it's very hard to, you know, involve people in a campaign using social media that's now banned and is literally considered evil. They've literally used the word evil in reference to Instagram because it's defaming the glorious army and so on. So, you know, it's actually became impossible to involve Russians and Cook for Ukraine, which is heartbreaking because, again, from the research and the work that I've done on my new cookbook, I know there's so many fantastic recipes and having spoken to people, I kind of send out questionnaires asking people about their identity and what role food plays in their sense of self and sense of belonging. And so many people shared how multicultural their background is, and you know, there's Tatar cuisine, there are lots of course Ukrainian or people with Ukrainian roots like myself, and you know, it would have been an amazing contribution to this campaign, but sadly not possible right now.
And there's also so much Russian regional cuisine that I feel like, you know, Dara Goldstein started, you know, uncovering in the North Wind book, and you know, because both Ukraine and Russia, like the inner cultures have been suppressed by the USSR. You know, there was the standardization where you have to have like one borscht recipe, one, you know, like a cliche from every country, and there's just like one state recipe that everybody had to cook. And everything that was so historically rich has just been completely suppressed. And I feel like it's been done not just in Ukraine, but also in Russia. And that's, you know, I had such high hopes for your book to uncover more of those recipes that may have been lost, and now, yeah, it's extremely devastating. But truth will prevail. Please stop getting upset. It will be fine.
I know. Olia, if only, yeah.
He won't live for 20 years. Like those people that are getting prison, like I just don't believe that he's going to last that long.
Well,
Just saying.
This is an interesting question I want to ask you about. In my book Black Sea, I wrote about how during the Crimean War in the Turkish Black Sea city of Trabzon, which was a vital centre for providing the Ottoman armies in Crimea and the eastern Ottoman front lines, the governor of Trabzon, Osman Effendi, charged Suleiman Aga, the Sultan's chief pilaf cook, to make rice and bread for the soldiers on the front line. When the war was over, this tradition of making pilaf in vast quantities continued, and it's still weighed out in kilos in certain restaurants in Trabzon today, and you can buy it. Olia, I'd like to ask you, because I think this is really interesting, how are Ukrainian soldiers being fed? It's a huge operation, tens of thousands of soldiers. Are people cooking in Kiev, sending it forward to the front line? How's it happening? Is it bread and borscht? Do you know anything about how the soldiers are being fed?
Yeah, absolutely. All of the restaurateurs that I've known throughout the years in Ukraine, whether it's Kiev or Odessa, whatever, that's what they're doing now, because, you know, that's what they can do now to help. So there's like massive vats of borscht being cooked, and, you know, Odessa especially, I feel like everybody's just like, yeah, we've just like, you know, been making all of these amazing dishes. Like everybody's just really mobilized and doing everything that they can. And also, you know, the other day my brother, we talked on video call, and he said, you know, we went into this like derelict, bombed out building, and this is where we're staying now. And, you know, I've been put on cooking duty because I was the only one who knew how to use an electric hob. What's that called? What's that called?
An electric hob?
You know, not the induction hob. He was like, yeah, I was the only one who knew how to use induction hob. So I'm making everyone's meals now for 130 people. So I think, yeah, restaurants, but also brothers of Ukrainian chefs, you know. He's an amazing cook, by the way. Yeah.
All hands are on it.
Yeah.
I imagine so.
Yeah.
Alissa, obviously Russians too have long struggled under horrifically unjust regimes, and I think this is why many oppose what's happening today, obviously. Back in 2014 with Maidan and the invasion of Crimea, thousands of Russians rejected this state-controlled media, and they called on Russians to check what you hear and doubt what you see, which sounds like very good advice now. Alissa, how have things changed since then? Obviously, it's moving so quickly, this story, but it's impossible now for people to protest. What's the situation today for how can anybody speak out? Can anybody speak out? Like, what's the difference between 2014 and now, and how much further has it gone?
Yeah, I think George Orwell would have been like just clutching his head thinking, I wouldn't even dream of... Yeah, exactly. So it's completely 1984 right now, and it's, you know, as a historian with a background in Soviet history, I always kind of think back and think, like, when was that point of no return? Was there ever that chance where we could have done something, you know, spoke out more, walked out more, I don't know, protested? When? You know, when was it? Was it 10 years ago when Putin won an election, you know, the first blatantly illegal election? Was it then? Because, you know, I remember going to vote, and before we even like had a chance to go from the embassy to the pub, he already won, and I'm like, excuse me, you obviously haven't had the chance to count my vote.
I think it was Chechnya, to be honest with you. I mean, like thinking back at all of the atrocities that he's been doing throughout, how did people just watch that happen? Why are they? What, I don't understand. I don't know how that happened.
And I mean, in a way, it's kind of, you know, everything that happened before it is the reason for the way things are right now. So it's very hard to kind of draw that line that here we still had a chance and now we've lost it. But, you know, this whole notion of truth and lies is mind-boggling. You know, it literally is the Ministry of Truth right now, and it's completely inverted. Truth is false and false is truth.
It is impossible for anybody who has not lived in Russia, and I haven't lived in Russia, my husband has, he gets it. it is impossible for most people to understand this from the outside.
No, completely. And and to me, perhaps the most horrendous example of that, which to me personally, I think, within me, I've reached some kind of ground zero in terms of kind of my comprehension of this ideology, is the horrendous bombing of the maternity ward in Mariupol. You know, not only they just said there were straight faces saying, you know, we had information that it was already occupied by the Nazis, but then when the footage is out, they're actually having programs on state channels where they analyze the shot by shot and explaining to people why this is a fake, why this is a setup, and this woman is an actress, and they say it's the same woman. Can't they find two actresses at least? And it's like, can you not see they're two different women? You know,
and
they
she'd
even
use makeup, and then certain embassies around the world were also touting this. It was incredible.
So to witness that, and yeah, I just felt like my brain shut down at one point. I just literally cannot even come anywhere close to comprehending how this can be portrayed on state channels as fake news. So it's that bad, basically. And tragically, you know, so many people who are there, of course now it's becoming a lot harder to get access to real information, but you know, the real crime of Putin's regime is the assault on the very principle of truth. You know, there's certain values that people just know kind of conceptually, you know, they just feel it deep within them. And he completely violates that. And to me, this is probably the biggest crime that his regime has committed. And, you know, people don't even understand the context anymore. You know, when you tell them this is the truth, they say, no, this is fake. And you get to a point where you just get so disheartened, you know, with humanity in general. And I've had recently, you know, I'm kind of a lot more active on my Instagram right now and kind of sharing a lot more than just recipes. And so many people have got in touch saying, you know, you're being brainwashed, like, you know, kind of seeing that the West is the place where media is used to bombard you with propaganda and, like, you know, kind of save yourself before it's too late. And I'm wondering, well, do I engage with this person or do I just ignore it? And is there any point in trying to convince someone? And I'm thinking, gosh, you know, I have a PhD in Soviet history, surely, like, I can put this message across, but then I think, you know what, I'm just going to devastate myself more.
Alissa, I don't know how he does it.
That charmless, complete lack of charisma man, how did he do it? Because my own uncle, my mom's brother, who she was the closest with, left in the 70s to go to a military academy in Moscow, married a Latvian woman, they had 2 daughters. An amazing uncle, would like spend the night when he would come to Ukraine, you know, talking about Kierkegaard or whatever, philosophy, yoga, whatever. He was just like this amazing man. You know, Putin comes to power. They used to come to Ukraine every summer to either stay with us or my grandma, whatever. And, you know, but alarm bells have been going off from 1999, like there was one incident in the early 2000s when my dad said Putik, which is like a diminutive of Putin, like he made a little silly joke, you know, whatever. And one of my cousins, who was 15 at the time, burst into tears. She was just distraught that he said something, you know, like mildly bad about Putin. And we were all like, okay, you know, let's just maybe not mention Putin anymore. But, you know, we were just a bit like, okay. And then in 2014, when the war happened in eastern Ukraine and Crimea and everything, they started posting things about Ukrainian Nazis on the Facebook, like my cousins. And then he came to my aunt's funeral, and he started saying things like Ukrainian is not a real language. And that's a son of my grandparents, of his parents, who have been through all of the repressions, he knows the minute details of everything that's happened to them. He knows us. They've spent every single summer with us. It's so painful. I can't even describe to you how painful it is right now. And I sent him a message on the second day of the war, and I sent him a message, and I said, one of your sisters is in a bunker in Berdyansk, another one of your sisters and my dad are in Kakhovka under siege, and one of your nephews, my brother, has just joined the territorial army. These are your Nazis, I said. And I cursed him. And then he sent my mom a message
on her birthday on the 8th of March a few days later, and he said, "Hello, happy birthday. I hope you're great and you're having a beautiful day. I really hope to see you again." How? How did that man do this to my mum's brother? I don't...
You wrote so beautifully about it in the New Statesman.
That was such a brilliant piece, Olia, because I think people don't understand how this is ripping families apart.
Can anybody explain to me how he got into, how it's literally like I was talking to my cousin today. She told me about the thing that he sent to my mum. And it's as if aliens came, plucked his soul out, threw it out and put something else in. Like, I can't explain it in any other way. It's like the core has been taken out of people. And if a son of Ukrainian grandparents can become like that after living there for 40 years, I'm honestly, there's still a glimpse of hope inside of me. I really hope that something will happen and they will get rid of him, but it defies belief. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, and there's an amazing story by the Strugatsky brothers, the writers, beautiful science fiction writers, precisely about, it's very Orwellian, the way the signals, there's like secret radio transmission that sends signals, and those people who don't hide in a certain way from them, they literally, the brain, chemistry gets changed and they become more susceptible to propaganda messages. So
it's always there in science fiction. The clues are always like with Len.
Absolutely.
He was from Lviv. He knew.
Exactly.
Alissa, you were very honest in your book, Salt and Time, about how the current regime is, and you called it a dangerous trajectory, how it made you feel alienated, and you mentioned it was by focusing on your own family that's helped you feel connected to Russia. Can you expand on those ideas a bit and tell us a bit about the dishes which really encapsulate that feeling of home for you?
Yes, and I've kind of reread the introduction to Salt and Time recently, and I thought, God, little did I know how just how dangerous that trajectory is.
Yeah.
And I did get a lot of criticism from some kind of obviously pro-Putin Russians saying, why do you call our government a regime and what's food got to do with it? Well, we know now. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really important to remember that, I'm quite passionate about this notion that nationality is a social construct, and it's a very detailed and very precisely manipulated notion that governments built and kind of instill in people. So I try to think of myself and people, outside that kind of closed-in understanding of nationalities. So to me, it's more about a sense of belonging rather than being of a specific nation, of course. So, when I think of home, when I think of myself as being a person from Siberia, outside the political context, I, of course, immediately, I have this very kind of strong image, and I think that's what I had when I was writing the introduction to the book, is a winter evening, and it's dark, and there's beautiful, fluffy snow falling down, and back in my apartment in Omsk, we had this really lovely kind of rustic green kitchen and a small green light, kind of table lamp. So there's very kind of warm, cozy sense, and then we would have pelmeni dumplings,
This is my idea of heaven, literally my idea of heaven.
So to me, that memory, in a broth with lots of pepper and sour cream and a slice of rye bread on the side.
Ever a little bit of vinegar or not?
No,
I like the vinegar.
Not, but I know that, of course, that's that's definitely another classic way of eating pelmeni. So to me, that was kind of the image that I had in my mind, because the first draft of the introduction was quite hardcore and quite political, and everyone was like, oh, maybe that's a bit much. So
I'm glad that you didn't back down.
So I found, I really kind of grounded myself in that beautiful memory, and I think it's from that memory that the rest of the book really kind of flowed, and I found my tone.
That's a lovely images you're painting for us. Thank you. I've got about 10 minutes left before we're going to open the floor to questions. This is something I really want to ask you both about, and it's a bit of a long question, bear with me. I want to talk about bread and wheat, because we are here to talk about food primarily. And I'm thinking about the bread factory that was bombed outside Kyiv, and how it was a Russian tactic. It's what they did in Syria, attacking hospitals and food factories. Civilians can live a long time in a besieged city, but only if the medical and the food supplies hold up. This is a bad tactic that the Russians tend to employ. But I'm also thinking about the scramble of wheat, given that Russia and Ukraine accounts for 30% of global exports. And not only 20% of corn exports, 80% of the world's sunflower oil. Some analysts are saying millions of tons of grain may not make it out of the country this year, and there are fears that the shortfall could spread hunger and civil unrest elsewhere. I didn't know Egypt and Turkey source most of their wheat from the Black Sea region, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and a number of sub-Saharan countries also buy at least half of their wheat from Ukraine. Some of these countries will have the hardest time paying when these prices rise, which is where the problem will be. What does this conflict mean? I know this is a difficult question, but what does this conflict mean for the millions dependent on Ukrainian wheat? Can you talk about this a bit, please, Olia? And also, you've got those lovely pictures in your book of standing in those fields with the horses. Talk about how central grain is to Ukrainian culture as well.
So, I knew that Ukraine was a big exporter of wheat. I only myself have found out about Egypt and all of that. I had no clue, to be honest with you.
Remarkable, isn't it?
Wheat has such an intense significance to us. Obviously, it's been taken during the Holodomor, and loads of people died. And actually, that's what my grandfather was imprisoned for in 1946. So there, even after the war, there have been shortages, and there was a law of 3 spikelets. Is that how I call the little sheaths of wheat?
Oh.
So there was a law basically that if you steal, if you take more than 3
Spikes from now on. I don't know.
Sure. If you take more than 3 sheaths of wheat from a field, you will be imprisoned and sent to a gulag. Basically, that's how it belongs to the USSR. You're not, even if you're starving, you're not allowed to take it. My grandfather, it wasn't even wheat. He literally got out of his car and was picking wild herbs on the curb of the road, and he was imprisoned for 7 years, and he was sent to Sakhalin, near Japan. Okay, so that's how controlled it's been. That's how twisted it's been. But I don't know. Yesterday I saw a beautiful video of Ukrainian tractors in Kherson, in my region, that were going to work with big Ukrainian flags stuck on top of each of them, and they're whatever, Russian tanks. We're going to work now because this is the time for us to do some stuff. So I don't know. Let's hope that it's all kind of. Despite all of the horrors that we've been describing today, there's a really, really strong, not just of anxiety, but also the anxiety is here and the hope is here. And I'm just hoping that those strong people are going to be no, we're going to work. Who are you? Have you seen the grandma in Kherson? She's like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
What are your mom? What's your mom gonna say? What are you doing here? We are fine. We can handle our own government, thank you very much. We are fine. We've had a really nice life here, and now you're coming and disturbing us. Yeah. And I hope that, these conversations, maybe it's they're being those soldier psychiatrists, but I'm hoping
young boys.
Yeah, and if there is a crisis, then there's going to be little sparks of unrest all over the world, and so we'll I don't know. I wish that I could see the future. I'm trying to
through
Twitter, but it's not working. I just don't know what's going to happen.
But my hope also is that, of course, it's absolutely devastating to imagine what the effect the food shortages will have on the rest of the world. I mean, my parents in Montenegro now already can only buy 1 bag of flour.
Wow.
That's already quite alarming. But I'm really hopeful that, sadly, this is what it will take for most of Russia to stand up and say enough. As we were saying earlier, obviously, different people have different value systems, and for certain people, freedom of speech is completely essential. That's a deal breaker, and they will go out on the street. For others, gay rights. Many people said, who cares about gay rights in Russia? Whatever. Mm-hmm. But shortages of bread,
that brings people out onto the
literally
streets.
No one who will say, I don't care.
Yeah.
So that's my only hope, as drastic and awful as this is, that will literally be the last drop and people will throw over that regime.
That's interesting. Okay, I think what I'm going to do is end on a slightly more optimistic or slightly more cheerful note. It's springtime, starting to think about Easter. Are you both going to mark it in any way this year? How do you mark it in Ukraine and Russia? Can you talk a little bit about Easter and what dishes you might be doing, or what you'd be doing back home if you were there?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, it's, you know, Christmas has always been like the second best. Like, Easter is massive. And even though my family has never been religious, but my mom would always go and to church and like queue from 5 o'clock in the morning with her like Pascha breads to get them, you know, blessed. Yeah. So, it's massive. And, you know, the breads, the yeasted breads, which I don't know if in Russia they're called kulich, in the south of Ukraine we call them pascha. And, you know, it's this beautiful enriched dough. Actually, my auntie Luda makes it by fermenting mashed potatoes. So she makes like a mashed potato starter. And then she makes these, and then they make like, I don't know, 20 of these like amazing breads, glazed with a little bit of sugar and egg white and some, you know, hundreds and thousands.
Olia, does she make them in the baked bean tins?
Yeah,
The tomato tins,
yeah. Like the massive,
like a mushroom over the top.
yes, the massive tomato tins. Like that's why you keep them. So yeah, so you know that's something that they would be making. And when I was little, I was just like, why are you making 20 of them? But actually, you know, it's worth it. They're amazing. Yeah.
Alissa, for you?
Completely the same.
The same, right?
And I have this wonderful memory of my great-grandmother, even though she was ethnically Jewish, and I actually don't know why, but their family obviously converted to Christianity, and she was a very devout Christian, and you know she's told us that you know she survived the Holocaust because she literally walked out of the line praying. You know, it was a miracle that you know she was queuing up to be shot dead, but she just something told her to just walk, and she did, and no one noticed her, and that's
Amazing.
why you know my family is here. And of course, as anyone who survived the Holocaust and the war, bread was such a big part of her religion in a way, and bread was such a big, you know, she had such a reverence for bread, and she was in our family the one who would always make pascha or kulich, and she would always put on a clean white robe, but it was very, you know, it was very religious, it was very ceremonial, almost like witchcraft, and I remember when I was a kid, I shared a room with her. So every evening around Easter, she would, you know, perform her wonderful witchcraft ritual where she would put on this white robe and she would walk into the kitchen and she would work the dough. And it was this massive kind of light blue enamel casserole, almost like overflowing with the dough. And as a kid, I would just watch her thinking, what is she doing? It's just so magical and so bizarre. And yes, and then in the morning we would get exactly those beautiful breads that are kind of popping out of the tin and decorated with a lovely white sugary thing on top.
You know, I gave my recipe to a friend. We both worked for Sainsbury's magazine at some point, so she's an editor of House and Garden, I think, Emma, English, and I gave her my auntie's Pascha recipe to test for my cookbook Mamushka. I was like, please, can you test it? Because I've never, you know, I just need like an English pair of eyes on this. And later on in the evening, she sends me this picture of like the biggest bowl that she had in the house. And her fridge open, and like the dough is just like overtaking her fridge, just devouring her fridge, just out on the floor, just like exploding. She was like, were your parents bakers? Were they professional bakers? Like, what the hell is going on? But yeah, this is life. This is our life.
Thank you both. Those incredible insights into the Easter traditions. Questions? I'm sure there are many. How do we do this?
Alissa, can you start? I need the toilet. Back in a sec. So sorry.
Is someone from Pushkin House going to walk the mic around, or shall I, or how's this going to work? Shall I do that? Okay, sure. Who's got a question for Alissa? Anybody? I can kick things off if you like. Anybody got a question? Good. Okay, I'm coming to you. Is this on? Yes, it is. Okay. Just pass that down for me. Thank you.
answer, I'm sure. What meal or what dish would you say unites your friendship? Is there something that you often eat together that you enjoy?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. I have a really special food memory connected to Olia, and I'd love her to be here to hear it, but I'll start anyway. It's got nothing to do with Eastern European cuisine, but when I had my baby, and I was in this first weeks of kind of postpartum crazy state of sleep deprivation and not knowing what to eat. And I did have quite a tough time in the beginning. And then Olia and her wonderful husband Joe came over, and they cooked the most amazing curry, kind of Thai-style curry with gigantic casserole of curry with rice. And Olia held the baby, and I had this kind of first meal, which to me is one of the most special meals I've ever had, and I will always remember it so dearly. It really did help me kind of come to my senses and really kind of, I don't know, just realign myself and feel me again. So that really is a very special one. And then we've been very lucky to spend lots of Christmases and New Year's together with our families, and there's fantastic duck noodles that Olia spoke so beautifully about. I've been very lucky to enjoy those quite a few times. So there's a question about what meals do we share as friends and what kind of dish represents our friendship. And I did tell this fantastic story about you and Joe cooking that amazing curry for me when I just had Rosie and you guys came over. And it's one of the best meals I've ever had.
And I'll never forget your chicken
With prunes. When we also had that really intense chocolate tart, and then my older son like ate a lot of it and went a little bit nuts. It was really good.
Any other questions?
Someone must have a question. Okay, coming to you. Can I have to pass that down away, please?
Yeah.
Okay.
I turned around and there's like a mirror of this room. I was like, is this a different dimension? Like, what's going on?
Oh, mine's really basic then. It kind of follows on, I guess. But I was just wondering about, I'm nosy. I wanted to know how old your kids were and like what, well, you know, the deeper question would be like, how do you talk to them about it? But really, I wanted to know, what do you cook them? What are their favourite sort of Ukrainian and Russian dishes? Or you can expand it generally. But I'm always curious about the kids. Yeah.
Did I go first up? Yeah. So I've got Sash, who, interestingly enough, two of his favorite dishes are borscht and pelmeni. So, you know, I have like a video of him when he's about 2 and he's dangling this thing around and he's like, Mama, spaghetti. I'm like, no, that's beetroot. But, you know, whatever. You enjoy it. He loves it. He loves it so much. And, you know, sometimes it hurts me a little bit that he loves my mom's borscht the most. It's like whenever my mom's around and we're like, okay, it's borscht for dinner. And he's like, did grandma make it? I'm like, what? He loves it. And my mom also makes him pelmeni, which are my grandma's Siberian dumplings. So he's, you know, vareniki, the Ukrainian ones, he doesn't like. I'm just like, come on, these are my favorite. He's just like, no. It's all, my husband is vegetarian, so he's all like, whenever he can get meat, he's gonna like ask for it for sure. So, you know, my mom comes and she makes like hundreds of them, and we have like a dumpling freezer drawer. And that's where we keep them, and then Sasha's just like in heaven forever. But yeah, borscht and dumplings, I think, are his favorite. And obviously like duck noodles and stuff as well. But also one of his favorite things is literally just the cucumber picked off from my mom's garden. Like that's what he waits for every summer. It's just like, he wakes up in the morning, at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's already like scorching sun, and he would run there, and he'd pick one off. And, you know, like we always think of cucumbers as this really cold thing, but he knows them as really warm and prickly. And my mom taught him how to get rid of the spikes. And yeah.
For my daughter, she's only 3.5, but she absolutely loves dumplings, and pelmeni is a big part of it. I think it was only yesterday I was doing an interview on the phone and I mentioned dumplings, and she's like, are we making dumplings tonight? And I'm like, no, I was just mentioning it. And I had this massive meltdown. You know, she's 3, so that's what she does. So she had a massive meltdown that I'm not going to give her dumplings. And also she absolutely loves sauerkraut. She called it cabbagey noodles. And she like
Right, what is it about that?
loves waving them around, and she like dips them in her mouth, and then she goes, "Oh, this is so tickly," because you know it's obviously like tangy, and she just loves it. And we make, you know, during over lockdown, it was just me and her at home for so many months. So we've done like lots of fermentation together, and she just loves getting messy with like the kraut and like massaging it and eating it. And then we would make dumplings together as well. She's great actually for her age, very good like hand coordination. So she does actually shape a dumpling. Of course, it's, you know, it's huge and has the most unique shape, but she's, you know, she's straight in there. She loves the dough and she loves the dumplings, and I'm super proud of that.
I've just run downstairs, and Justine has a question. She wants to know, what are you cooking at the moment during this difficult time? Are you relying on certain meals or certain preparations at home at the moment to get you through?
I haven't cooked.
You're not cooking?
No. No, I cooked once. I made 5 dumplings for Jon Snow when he came to do the documentary. They asked me to, and I did it for him, but I can't do it. Which is weird, because normally in times of stress or anxiety, I do turn to cooking actually, and it's an amazing therapeutic tool, but at the moment I'm just so...
This is a whole other level.
It's a whole other level, but luckily I have my husband who's been cooking from summer kitchens and making my mom's food, which is then he's an amazing cook, so that's been lovely. And then the other day my neighbor Parvin, who's from Bangladesh, came over with a 5-kilo bag of like curries and rice and black chickpeas and so on. And then another friend of mine, Amy Poon, just has sent me some pork, you know, Chinese pork and chicken broth. So I'm being nourished, but yeah, I don't know when I'm going to be able to do it again. I'm hopefully soon.
Same, it's been quite tough, and also tough because I find such solace in cooking, and I haven't been able to give myself that pleasure and that kind of grounding experience. And I've also started working part-time as well, you know, specifically to do with the conflict. So I've literally, like, hats off to working mums, I don't know how you do it. I literally wasn't able to have the time nor the kind of right frame of mind to cook, so it's been a lot of M&S ready meals, you know, is the truth. And then I just had to get my mum over.
Yeah.
And for the last week, it's been wonderful home food like mash and meatballs, borscht, lovely chicken soup with noodles, and that kind of, you know, literally the last few days I kind of felt a little bit more settled in my body, that I can actually kind of digest food, and I was able to enjoy some really lovely home food.
Good.
Thanks, Mum.
I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. Has anybody thought of a question they'd like to ask? If not, I have a question I'd like to ask. Ah, lovely.
How do you feel about the way Russian versus Ukrainian food is represented in the UK when it comes to restaurants, whether it's high street or whether it's in cookery books and online journalism? And how do they maybe complement each other, or how are they appropriated in terms of, from non-Ukrainian and non-Russian chefs?
I feel like there's still a way to go to really explore the core of each cuisine, even for us. So, I don't know, sometimes I feel like everything is put into one basket and it's like, oh, Eastern European food is, you know, this and this and this. But I don't know, how do you feel, Alissa?
And, you know, we didn't really discuss the phenomenon of Soviet cuisine, but I feel that, you know, there's a hangover still here. And, you know, you go to a Russian restaurant, but then you have Georgian, Ukrainian food, but they all kind of mushed into it, presented as Russian. It's very kind of, you know, imperialist and very Soviet in a way. So as you rightly say, you know, we still have a lot of work to do to really unpick this complex history with, you know, where a lot of oppression of regional cuisine has happened. So at the moment, yeah, the Russian restaurants definitely dominate the scene. There are Ukrainian restaurants in London, but they're not as prominent as, you know, there's certain restaurants in Soho or in Knightsbridge which serve Russian food, but kind of a real celebration of Ukrainian or Russian regional cuisine, yeah, that's, you know, not there yet at all.
Such a shame. I'm going to sit down and see if I just do one more question maybe before we finish up. Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you, Dima. I wasn't sure if this is a silly question or not, but I thought I quite wanted to know the answer. Which Russian in history would you like to sit at the table with and share a meal with, Olia? And which Ukrainian historical figure would you like to sit and have dinner with? Olia first.
Dostoevsky. I mean, hands down. As a teenager, I mean, I think I was really quite obsessed with The Idiot, and with the idea of, I don't know, with the idea of this like kind, amazing person, and maybe people being misunderstood and all that kind of thing. I think Dostoevsky is the one that I would really love to have a chat with.
That's a great answer. What would you eat?
What would we eat?
Yeah, one thing. What do you think he would like?
I don't know. Maybe just like some shots of vodka and
a cry.
Yeah, shots of vodka and mixed with tears, and some sturgeon and rye bread or something. Yeah, I'd be happy with that.
Okay. Alissa?
Oh gosh, that's an
It's
amazing
a bit
question.
of a trick. I know it's a bit of a
Yeah,
tricky. You don't have to answer it.
I'd say just the first person who comes to mind is Alexandre Davrenko. You know, he's known to the world as the Soviet director, but of course he was Ukrainian. And for those who don't know him, he is one of the fathers of cinema of Eastern Europe and Russia and Soviet Union. And I mean, very complex figure. Of course, he was part of the state machine and propaganda, but at the same time, his films are so full of poetry, and the way, for example, his film Earth, the way that celebrates Ukrainian landscapes and the femininity of the landscape and the contemplation on life and death. I mean, it's philosophical, it's poetic, it's incredible. But at the same time, he was a big supporter of the Communist Party. You know, he was kind of the apparatchik within the system. So I would just love to tease out those like contradictions, and like being one of the biggest visionaries and one of the forefathers of contemporary cinema as we know it. Like, how did you kind of, you know, support something that wasn't really...
So what would you give him to drink? Because to open him up a bit, because you've got amazing drink recipes in your book at the back. So you'd be serving him vodka probably, but with what? Like, what sort of thing would you be gently just topping him up, keeping him going, you know, getting what you need?
I have a recipe for, I guess it's a salsa. It's a fermented horseradish and tomato salsa called hrinovina. And it's quite, you know, it's used as a sauce, like, you know, as a salsa, but it has lots of liquid. So that liquid just, oh my God, it's amazing.
Perfect pickleback.
Yes, so I think I would definitely invite him to chase the vodka shots with hrinovina. Hopefully he would tell me everything.
I really want to be at both of these happenings, please, just quietly in the background. Thank you both ever so much. I've had a fascinating time. It's been intense, I knew it would be, but you've both been brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I also want to thank Caroline for coming from Edinburgh specifically for this event. It's been an honor. And a huge thank you to Pushkin House we came up with this idea within a week, and they've been incredible at making this work. A huge thank you to all the volunteers. Like, just the generosity and the selflessness of being part of this campaign is amazing. And also a big thank you to our wonderful food and drinks. I don't want to call it sponsors, they're like sisters and brothers. Dima of Dima's Vodka. also a fantastic catering company called the Social Pantry, who provided the beautiful food, and also my personal favorite bakery called Caraway, who provided the lovely buns and cakes as well. So thank you to everyone for that.
Thank you so much for coming and for
It was quite an intense and long talk, so thank you for listening to us.
Oh, sorry, but if you haven't had enough of us three talking, we'll be doing an event at the British Library on Tuesday, the 22nd.
I'm coming back down.
So do come along. We'll probably...
We won't repeat the questions. I'm going to do fresh questions.
And tell your friends as well. Thank
And
you.
also, we'll be downstairs, bit of a social chit-chat if anybody wants to come and speak to Alissa and Olia. Thank you.
so much. Thank you.